May is Historic Preservation Month. I'm Paul Sailors, local history assistant for the Wayne County Public Libraries. I'm going to take you through a brief history of the historic preservation movement in the United States and tease you a little bit with some of Goldsboro's diverse architecture and how the city of Goldsboro developed. I'll go more in depth on the architecture of Goldsboro and Wayne County at a later date, and I hope you will join me. The preservation movement began with federal legislation. You can find all of the preservation briefs and what they are exactly. 50 briefs, pages and pages long, very detailed information of how to preserve, rehabilitate, or restore historic buildings in the United States. These National Park Service publications help historic building owners recognize and resolve common problems prior to work. Federal legislation began in 1906 with the Antiquities Act, followed in 1916 with the National Park Service, the act signed by Theodore Roosevelt. A little bit closer to home, the nation's first zoning ordinance having to do with historic preservation began in Charleston, South Carolina in 1931. It was promoted heavily by the Preservation Society of Charleston, founded in 1920, the first preservation organization in America. Moving closer to home, by state legislation, the Historic Districts and Landmarks legislation was passed to safeguard the heritage of the city or county by preserving any district or landmark therein that embodies important elements of its culture, history, architectural history, or prehistory. And it promoted the use and conservation of such district or landmark for the education pleasure and enrichment of the residents of the city or county and the state as a whole. Coming back to Main Street, Center Street, Goldsboro, the preservation movement. Downtown Goldsboro Development Corporation was founded in 1979. Its mission statement includes beautiful, historic, lively, and full economic opportunity and gusto. We honor our past while developing diversity and vibrancy to create a cultural, arts, entertainment, and urban lifestyle center. We are a Main Street community in Goldsboro. A brief history of city and town planning of Waynesboro, Goldsboro, Fremont, Pikeville, and Mount Olive. They all were founded on a grid plan. The railroad in Goldsboro's Junction. So Goldsboro was named for Matthew T. Goldsboro. He was an engineer for the railroad. By 1839, people were moving to Goldsboro from Waynesboro because of the railroad. By 1830, Mr. Arnold Borden built a hotel on the side of the railroad on Center and Walnut Streets. By 1839, people were moving from Waynesboro to Goldsboro's Junction, as it was known. And by the late 1800s, the City Beautiful movement swept across the nation, hitting Goldsboro a bit late. In 1906, Union Station was built at the end of Walnut Street, and the tracks were derailed on Center Street in 1926. The late 19th century and early 20th century growth in Goldsboro encompassed the ward system, dividing the city up into 5 wards, basically 5 neighborhoods, represented by a city alderman or city council member. There were different neighborhoods in town referred to as Borden's Bottom, Hell's Bottom, Webtown, Little Washington. The ward system, a precursor to today's city council districts, was a common political tool of the early 19th century. and is still used in some American cities, like New Orleans and Houston. Now I will talk about the built environment. Our civic and religious buildings in Goldsboro have a smattering of different architectural styles, ranging from Gothic Revival to Romanesque Revival. Our industrial buildings in 1914-1915, this is just before World War I, and the Goldsboro City Directory, which was basically the city phone book. I'll quote, it has 19 industrial plants with 1,650 employees, 4 banks. It handles annually 30,000 bales of cotton and 3 to 5 million pounds of tobacco. There is erected in Goldsboro a courthouse costing $100,000, 1 6-story office building, 1 5-story office building. Goldsboro has 30 miles of graded streets, 12 miles of paved streets, 27 miles of sidewalks. Goldsboro has 30 passenger trains a day and direct service from 3 trunk lines. By 1923, Goldsboro grew to have 55 industrial plants, still 5 strong banks, and 30,000 bales of cotton, and up to 10 million pounds of tobacco. School bonds were being purchased at an exorbitant rate. This is post-World War I, and had 9 modern public schools, and still averaged 30 passenger trains per day. From the built environment, I will talk a little bit about architecture in Goldsboro, which has a range of modern American architectural styles. When we talk about architecture, we talk about periods and styles. There are periods of architecture, and there are styles within the periods of architecture. For example, the Victorian period of architecture has several different styles. There's Queen Anne Victorian, there's Italianate Victorian, and there's what they refer to as High Victorian, which is very, very fancy. For the city of Goldsboro, and published almost 35 years ago in 1987, Barbara Hammond prepared an architectural inventory of Goldsboro, North Carolina. It runs a short gamut of what was considered historic architecture, some of what has been lost to us today. I would love to update it and add to it, but my point is, it's a starting point for a generation or two later. It provides wonderful historic sketches of buildings lost and those that have survived. Cultural landscapes are landscapes that have been affected, influenced, or shaped by human involvement. A cultural landscape can be associated with a person or event. It can be thousands of acres or a tiny homestead. It can be a grand estate, industrial site, park, garden, cemetery, campus, and more. Collectively, cultural landscapes are works of art, narratives of culture, and expressions of regional identity. There are primarily 4 types of cultural landscapes, although any given landscape may fall under more than one typology. There are designed landscapes, ethnographic landscapes, historic sites, and vernacular landscapes. Some of ours locally include the list you see on the screen: our cemeteries, Falls of the New State Park, Herman Park, Camp Tuscarora. My go-to for identifying architecture, in particular houses. A Field Guide to American Houses. It was a textbook of mine in college, and has been updated in recent years. We have it available in our library in the local history room. Please come see us. Please send me an email if you'd like to learn more about how Goldsboro grew, the architecture of our county and county seat, and historic preservation. Please enjoy a few pictures from our collection. The first picture is the Wayne County Courthouse. It was built in 1850, torn down in 1914, next slide, to build the current Wayne County Courthouse. This building was our post office in Goldsboro at the southeast corner of North John Street. It was demolished, and currently the Jeffries Federal Building stands on that site. Goldsboro City Hall was built in 1906 in the neoclassical revival style, harkening back to the Greek revival. Our Wayne County Public Library was first housed on the second floor of City Hall. The architecture in Wayne County varies greatly for the late 1800s. This is St. George's Episcopal Chapel. It's now demolished, in the country Gothic revival style. This building was located in Pikeville. St. Francis Episcopal Church, this picture dates to 1967, is more of an organic 20th century modern style. The Mozart Saloon building on Center Street harkens back to the railroad era of our Main Street town. Even this Jackson's Auto Clinic on Royal Avenue strikes me every time I pass by it. I hope it sticks around. It's a very good example of retro modern style. You'll find many of these on Center and Walnut Streets entrances to buildings, whether the buildings are still there or not. This is the Jewel Box at 115 West Walnut Street, which is vacant. Thank you again for joining me, and please send me an email if you have any questions, comments, suggestions.